There are smiles that hide storms. Gazes that shine under the spotlights but fade in the shadow of a house too quiet. Voices that comfort an entire nation but no longer dare whisper their own pain. That night, Faustine Bollaert realized that even the most sincere love could become a gilded cage. At 46, she finally breaks the silence about what Maxime Chattam truly did to her, not through physical violence, but through a slow, invisible erosion, almost polite. This is not a scandal. It is not revenge. It is a breath. A truth long buried behind the cameras, ready to crack the perfect image France thought was eternal. Her voice trembles. The images darken. Breath is held. And in that silence, a woman is reborn. Imagine her that precise night, in the dimness of her bedroom. The clock reads 3:17 a.m. The children sleep down the hall. Maxime is immersed in his words somewhere in the study, absorbed by his shadows. Faustine lies awake, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling as if it could answer her. She feels her heart pounding, not from anger, not from immediate fear, but from a deep fatigue that has built drop by drop year after year. She remembers the beginning, the complicit laughter, the wild plans, the nights they talked until dawn. How did they get here? To this polished void, this distance that no longer even needs words to exist? She rises softly, barefoot on the cold wooden floor, and walks to the window. Outside, the moon illuminates the garden, motionless, as if frozen in eternal waiting. And there, in that chiaroscuro, she whispers for the first time, "I can't go on." Not loudly. Just enough for the universe to hear. Faustine Bollaert. A name that evokes gentleness, trust, balance. Trained at ISEP, she became, over the years, the familiar face of afternoon television. In "C'est commence aujourd'hui" she listens. She consoles. She repairs. She is the spiritual mother of a nation that cries, laughs, confides. Her smile is a signature. Her voice is a balm. Her gaze is an invitation to vulnerability. For millions of French people, she embodies French-style success. A woman who has it all: career, family, respect. A host who understands without judging. A mother who protects without smothering. But behind the spotlights, something cracked. Not a spectacular shatter. Not a brutal fall. Just a silent fatigue, a nameless wound that even her closest friends couldn't name. Think of those moments after a show when she stays alone in her dressing room, makeup still fresh but eyes already empty. She removes her earrings one by one, as if peeling off layers of an invisible armor. She looks at herself in the backstage mirror and wonders, who is this woman? She came home late, exhausted, eyes red from others' tears. She absorbed everything: separations, bereavements, rebirths. Every testimony was a mirror. She healed others. But who healed her? Her friends said, "She's radiant, but more absent." She laughs, but her laughter stops too soon. She worked. She smiled. She held on. But in the dead of night, her heart beat louder than the applause. The world applauded her, France admired her, but in private, an invisible wall had risen. Her husband's words weighed heavier than her own silences. Sharp phrases, never cruel but icy, leaving invisible marks. "You're too sensitive," he sometimes said, as if gentleness were a weakness. And she, to avoid disturbing, stayed silent. She convinced herself everything was fine, that every couple goes through dark patches. But deep down, she knew something was fading. She recalled those dinners where they talked about everything and nothing, but no longer about themselves. Those trips where landscapes flew by, but their hands no longer sought each other. Those anniversaries celebrated in style, but without the spark that makes you feel alive. Maxime Chattam. Writer. Dark universe. Imagination filled with shadows, silences, unspoken words. A fascinating man. An absent man. She the light. He the darkness. Together, they formed a poetic balance on paper. But in their home, far from the cameras, immense solitude reigned. Two parallel worlds, two souls touching only out of habit. He wrote at night. She came home exhausted. The house was plunged into strange silence. It wasn't violence. It wasn't drama. It was worse. A polite indifference. A solitude for two. She would get up, walk down the hall, watch her children sleep. That was her only peace. In front of them, she became strong, loving, whole again. But as soon as the door closed, the weight returned. A mix of damaged love, silent respect, total misunderstanding. She thought back to their beginnings. Him with his crumpled manuscripts, her with her interview notes. They complemented each other. Or at least, that's what she believed. Over time, his darkness no longer illuminated her light, it absorbed it. She had loved. Deeply. Intensely. But loving, sometimes, means forgetting yourself. And she had forgotten herself. Slowly. Over the years. Over the silences. She took refuge in her work, in others' stories, in the tears she wiped away. But every testimony echoed in her like a broken mirror. I heal others, while emptying myself. This infinite empathy that made her so loved by the public became a flaw. She filled her days with shows, filming, televised laughter. But at home, the screen went dark and silence took over again. She carried that silence like an overly heavy coat. She knew she had to speak but no longer knew to whom. So she wrote pages, sentences, fragments of pain never published. There, in those secret words, the decision to one day speak publicly was forged, without hatred, without shouting. Those notebooks hidden under the bed, blackened by sleepless nights, were her mute confidants. She poured into them the unsaid, the regrets, the faded hopes. Every line was a step toward freedom. She didn't accuse. She understood. She spoke to break a taboo, the void at the heart of a couple, the silent wounds hidden behind success and apparent tenderness. Her loved ones said that at that time, she was afraid to stop, afraid that silence would reveal too much truth. She felt like a guest in her own life. Gazes that empty, promises repeated without belief, gestures that become mechanical. What she lived through was the slow erosion of self under the weight of duty, image, silence. A discreet violence, almost polite, but devastating. She didn't want to be seen as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming the right to say she was afraid, that she doubted, that she felt alone even though she never stopped loving. This solitude wasn't empty, it was full of memories, of what had been and what would no longer be. One morning, everything shifted. Not abruptly, but like those days when the light changes without knowing why. Faustine woke earlier than usual. The house's silence was no longer the same. She got up, walked down the hall, and in the mirror saw a face she no longer recognized. It wasn't fatigue or age, it was the absence of herself. This woman who for years had made France smile, soothed souls, and comforted wounds realized she no longer had the strength to comfort herself. That's when she understood something had to change. It wasn't an argument or a brutal breakup. It was a silent click, a truth that imposes itself suddenly. She sat on the edge of the bed and one word surged in her mind: leave. Not flee, but leave to find herself. She repeated that word inwardly, like a mantra, until it became real. She had spent years maintaining balance, preserving the image, believing that holding on would fix everything. But the truth was she no longer heard her own voice. She lived through expectations, appearances, habits. And one day she found the courage to say no. That no wasn't against Maxime Chattam. It wasn't against anyone, but for her. For the part of her that was suffocating, for the woman she had put on standby, for the light she wanted to rekindle. She decided to grant herself what so few dare, the right to breathe again. The decisions that change a life aren't made in noise. They're made in a whisper. And that whisper, Faustine finally listened to. It resonated in her chest, clear, sharp, inevitable. The following days were strange, suspended. She kept going to the set, smiling, listening to others, but inside, something was awakening. She began writing not scattered notes, but full sentences. Sentences that said, I feel alone, I'm afraid, I've forgotten who I am. She didn't intend those words for anyone, yet they would save her. Because in writing them, she reclaimed herself. Then came an evening, a simple dinner, no sparkle, a few words exchanged, silences heavier than sentences. And suddenly she said what she had never dared, I don't want to pretend anymore. In Maxime's gaze, there was no anger, no surprise, only long understanding. Perhaps he had known for a long time that this moment would come. Perhaps he too needed that step back to find himself. That shared gaze, without immediate tears, was a mutual recognition of where. It wasn't the end of a love story. It was the end of a sweet lie, a fragile balance, an ancient fear. The next day, she went for a walk alone. The air was cold, the sky a cruel winter blue. But for the first time in a long while, she truly breathed. She said she felt the wind cross her face like a sign, like a promise. That was the day she decided to speak. Not in a magazine, not on a show, but first to herself. To tell herself the truth, to name the pain, the where, the solitude, and then share it so she no longer carried it alone. When she chose to confide her story, many warned her, "You'll expose everything. You'll weaken your image." But Faustine knew the image was no longer what she wanted to protect. What she wanted to save was the truth. That raw truth that stings the eyes but frees the soul. She took the risk of showing the crack, the fragility, the shadow because she knew others, somewhere, were living the same thing. It's not the courage of a heroine, it's the courage of an ordinary woman on the edge of herself who refuses to fade quietly. When she says today, "I didn't leave against him, I left for me," you feel the weight of the years behind it. Those words aren't accusatory, they're liberating. They don't reject, they soothe. Faustine understood that true fidelity is sometimes the one we owe ourselves. And that fidelity she had lost along the way. Her circle saw her change. Less makeup, more silence, more authenticity. She no longer hides her tired eyes or her emotions. She says things as they are with that disarming gentleness that makes her unique. This change wasn't cosmetic, it was deep, rooted in every daily gesture. Some see it as new fragility, others as immense strength. The truth is she no longer plays a role. She simply lives. The public, rediscovering her this way, was shaken. Because behind the image of a perfect woman was a real woman. And that truth, raw, imperfect, resonates in the hearts of all who have known that silent weariness, that fear of being misunderstood. Faustine didn't choose flight, she chose rebirth. She describes this choice as a survival instinct. She didn't leave everything. She simply found herself again. Even today, she speaks of this turning point with modesty. She doesn't go into details, she refuses sensationalism. She speaks of emotion, distance, respect, the need to say things before everything becomes a lie. Every confidence is measured, like a treasure not to be scattered. In those words, there is no bitterness or vengeance. There is infinite kindness. And that kindness, paradoxically, is what allowed her to free herself. She understood that you can't build a life on silence, that even the most beautiful love can wear out if you stop looking at it, that sometimes you have to set everything down to start lighter. She made this decision alone, with new peace. Like closing a book you loved but can no longer continue reading. It's not a sad ending, it's a transformation, a way to honor what was while allowing herself to dream again. That day, Faustine Bollaert didn't leave a man. She left a version of herself that no longer existed. And in that gesture was all the dignity of a woman who, after years of listening, finally grants herself the right to be heard. This departure wasn't an explosion, it was a gentle implosion, clearing space. From that moment, something in her changed softly. It wasn't a sudden jolt, but a slow, deep movement like an inner tide rising after years of silence. Faustine Bollaert didn't just turn a page. She learned to read it differently. In the rediscovered calm of her mornings, without set noise or dazzling makeup, she began to retame her own reflection. The face she sometimes avoided, she now looks at with tenderness. It's no longer the face of a woman who must please, but of a woman who finally accepts herself. She says she rediscovered the beauty of simple gestures. Making coffee without haste, walking alone in the rain, feeling the wind remind her she exists. Truly, these aren't grand upheavals, but silent new beginnings, almost invisible. These daily rituals, once mechanical, now took on new flavor, as if she were tasting them for the first time. Every step, every breath, every minute spent proving nothing to anyone becomes an act of rebirth. There is in her voice a form of calm, a new gentleness, that of those who no longer flee their past. Faustine often says she regrets nothing. Not the shared years, not the mistakes, not the silences. Everything had meaning, even the pain. That's what makes her more human still. This way of loving without erasing, forgiving without forgetting, moving forward without denying. She speaks of Maxime with respect, as a necessary chapter in her life. He taught me to know myself differently, she confides. And sometimes knowing another is also discovering yourself. Those words carry no rancor, no sadness, but a quiet lucidity, that of those who understood life isn't meant to be perfect, but to be fully lived. This lucidity didn't come all at once. It was forged in sleepless nights, written pages, solitary steps. Since this transformation, everything seems different, even in her work. On screen, her gaze is deeper, her silence is more eloquent. She no longer just listens to her show's guests, she understands them differently. Every testimony, every tear placed before her becomes an echo of her own path. This invisible link between others' suffering and hers is now integral to her identity. She no longer plays the role of the kind confidant. She has become living proof that fragility can be strength. In the wings, those who cross her path feel this change. She speaks softer, but every word carries weight. She smiles, but without a mask. They say there's something softer, truer in her eyes. Perhaps that's peace? Not the absence of pain, but a new way to carry it without struggle. This new gaze even transformed the sets into sacred spaces where truth trumped spectacle. Faustine understood that happiness isn't a constant state, but a movement, an unstable balance between gratitude and lucidity. One evening in a low-voiced interview she confided, "I believe life takes nothing from us, it gives us back differently." This sentence sums up her entire journey. What she lost, she found in another form. Serenity, confidence, inner freedom. She stopped wanting to control, to understand everything. She now accepts that some wounds don't fully close, but they can become sources of light. She loves to say resilience isn't a spectacular victory, but a discreet continuity. It's not getting better, it's keeping going. In her gaze, there is this recognition of life, even when it hurts. She now knows every trial carries a promise. That of one day standing again, humbler, truer. This promise wasn't abstract. It manifested in calm mornings, spontaneous smiles. Her rebirth has nothing explosive. She didn't change countries, jobs, or circles. She changed her gaze. That's the whole difference. She no longer tries to escape her story. She inhabits it. She understands life is made of circles. Love, lose, understand, start again. And in that restart, she finds a beauty she had never seen before. This new maturity draws admiration. But Faustine is wary of it. She doesn't want to become a symbol, just a voice among others. She often reminds us we all need to fall at some point to learn to walk differently. Pain isn't an enemy, she says. It's a signal. It shows us where we need to heal. These words resonate especially with men and women of her generation. Those in their 40s or 50s who sometimes feel the weight of time, compromises, postponed dreams. She sees them in viewers' eyes, in received messages, in shared confidences. She speaks for them with them. She reminds them it's never too late to find yourself, to love better, to love yourself. And above all, there's no shame in saying you were afraid, that you got lost, that you doubted. Today, Faustine no longer tries to please everyone. She tries to be fair, sincere. Aligned with what she feels, she says you have to cross the night to understand the morning's value. And perhaps that's her greatest lesson. Life doesn't always pick up where you left it. Sometimes it starts again elsewhere. In a gaze, a silence, a new breath. In this second life, Faustine Bollaert no longer seeks perfection. She seeks wholeness. She no longer waits for others to understand her. She understands herself. And in this simple act of inner reconciliation lies all the grandeur of her rebirth. This wholeness showed in her posture, straighter, more relaxed, as if freed from an invisible weight. Because accepting isn't giving up, It's opening your arms to what life still has to offer. Even when everything seemed written. In the calm silence of this new life, Faustine Bollaert moves forward without noise, but with quiet strength. She no longer needs to prove or hide. She has simply chosen to be in the simplest truth, that of a woman who crossed the shadow to find the light again. Her story isn't a cry, it's a breath. It reminds us life isn't measured by what we lose, but by what we learn along the way. That courage, sometimes, is just continuing to love when everything seems to collapse. Faustine teaches us we can be reborn without denying, forgive without forgetting, and smile again even after storms. This teaching wasn't theoretical, it permeated every show, every interaction, every breath. And if through her story, each of us finds a bit of ourselves, a memory, a hope, a desire to finally dare speak. Because what she leaves us isn't a confession, it's an invitation to listen, understand, rise again, believe there's always a light, even the faintest, to guide our steps. If this story touched you, leave a word, a heart, a sign. Subscribe, share so Faustine's voice keeps resonating. Softly, humanly, like a breath of truth in the world's noise.